Cast brought to you by Israel Now. Our host, Meir Weinstein, will be on momentarily. I'm just stalling to give you all a little chance to kind of tune in on Twitter, which is now X, or on YouTube, or on anywhere you can, Facebook. And without any further ado, I'm going to give a very quick introduction, and then I'm going to give Meir and Meir the time on the screen, and I'll see you guys later after my intro. This is the Israel Now Never Again live broadcast. And certainly there's a lot of stuff going on to talk about, and we'll try to keep it below an hour if at all possible. But right now, start calling your friends and get them. The links are all on our Facebook page. And we'll talk about what would Rabbi Meir Kahane respond to the Israel-Hamas war. It's almost a rhetorical question, but it's certainly worthy of discussion. We have our special guest is Mayor Jolovitz, who's the past national chairman of the Jewish Defense League, as well as the national executive director of the Zionist Organization of America. Thanks for joining us tonight. And we have our honorable host, Meir Weinstein, who's the past North American director, along with Jolovitz and Kahane of Jewish Defense League, and is also the founder of this program, Israel Now, and our organization. So we have Meir Kahane, Meir Jolovitz, Meir Weinstein. We got three mayors. That's quite a deal. It may or may not be redundant. Get it? May or may not be redundant. We call it the 3M Corporation this evening. Meir, Meir, and Meir. Who are the 3Ms? It's the anti-worst nightmare. Get it? Nightmare. Sorry, guys, I couldn't resist a little. There's so much serious stuff going on. So basically, we'll talk about Kahane tonight. And the Jew is upset because the nations of the world brand him, us, the Jew, as racist and evil. They hate us, openly demonstrate their desire to destroy us, and no trade is more justified than revenge at the right place and time. One does not deal with terrorists. One does not bargain with terrorists. One kills terrorists. Above all, it is not decency or goodness that oppress the Middle East, but strength. Just I'm going to give a quick 30 seconds about my home state, which is Texas. It's the other Lone Star state, because what a lot of people don't realize in our Texas state right here is that we were the first state in the nation to endorse the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. We were number one, okay, not 2 or 10, but number 1. And our Governor Abbott has unequivocally said Texas stands ready to offer our complete and total support to Israel and the fight against brutal terrorist organizations like Hamas. I met with Greg Abbott last week, and we had a chat about thanking him. So this is what happens when a pro-Palestinian attempts to disrupt a Greg Abbott rally. You notice there were police and sheriffs there. They stood back and they let the crowd take this Palestinian supporter and drag him outside. I cut off the part what they do to him when he gets outside, because it may not be for children's audiences. So without any further ado, number 1, don't mess with Texas. Don't mess with Jews. And tonight's sponsor is the Concealed Carry Talit bag. Coming soon to Judaica shop near you. In Texas, we're allowed to carry. In fact, we're encouraged to do so. Without any further ado, that's my 2 moments of fame. Gentlemen, take it over, and I'm going to take off.
Thank you very much, Gary. Welcome to everyone who's joining us this evening. And I encourage everyone, please share this on your various social media platforms. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to discuss. There's a lot to unpack tonight. Right now, the international focus is on Israel, and how Israel conducts themselves in the southernmost part of Gaza, known as Rafah. And what seems to be developing right now is that the international community wants Israel to show maximum restraint. And Egypt is applying a lot of pressure on Israel as well in that regard. What are they afraid that Israel is going to uncover? Where did the weapons come from that Hamas was able to build up such a machinery? Obviously, they smuggled them in from various tunnels from Gaza to Egypt. Rabbi Meir Kahane opposed the Camp David Accords. Rabbi Meir Kahane opposed Israel giving up the Sinai, which Israel won as a result of the attack from Egypt in the 1973 war. Ever since Israel gave up the Sinai, there's been a buildup in the Sinai of various terrorist organizations who have been firing against Israel, hostile to Israel, very. So we're going to be discussing the positions of Rabbi Meir Kahane from then and what the positions would be now going forward. I have Mayor Jolovitz with me, and he's an expert on this subject. Mayor, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor, you remember when Israel had the Sinai, and then they gave it up to Egypt, and a rabbi opposed Israel giving up the Sinai. And is this a moment of deja vu? I mean, that we're 100% right. They don't want Israel uncovering, as Israel has uncovered UNRWA, right under the main headquarters of UNRWA, the tunnels and the intelligence that they had going on. And so I want to hear your thoughts, and the viewers want to hear your thoughts going back about Israel giving up the Sinai, what that means right now, and how, if that never happened, there would be no massive amounts of arms going to Hamas.
Okay, I never thought that I would actually quote Yogi Berra before I quoted Rabbi Meir Kahane, but it was Yogi Berra who said it's deja vu all over again. And the reason I mentioned deja vu all over again was because the Sinai that you speak about that Israel gave up was the second time that Israel gave up the Sinai. Those of us with long memories, or those of us who've lived a little longer, remember that in 1956, Israel took possession after the Sinai campaign of the Sinai. People also should be told that the Sinai Peninsula, 2.5 times the size of Israel proper. Well, Israel was pressured by then President Eisenhower and his then Secretary of State, who was as bad a Secretary of State Israel has ever faced, perhaps until Blinken. And because of pressure placed against Israel with all kinds of threats at the time, Israel's GDP was quite small, and the few dollars that Israel was able to get from the United States were meaningful. And some of it came in the form of Israel bonds. Well, it's remarkable that the American administration put pressure on Israel that if Israel didn't withdraw from the Sinai, that the tax-free status of certain contributions to Israel would be denied in America. And Israel, as a result of that, and American pressures, but more importantly, the promises made in the international level by the United Nations that there would be a peacekeeping force which would prevent any hostile enemies, in this particular case, we're talking about Egypt, from attacking or threatening Israel. And Israel, of course, foolishly, as they have many times since, foolishly did things. And what they did is they retreated from the Sinai. In 1967, when the UN forces proved not to be any obstacle to the Egyptian intention to destroy Israel, we obviously had the 6-Day War. Israel once again took possession of the Sinai. Not only did they take possession of the Sinai, they also took possession of Gaza. And it needs to be mentioned because for 19 years, between 1948 and 1967, the Gaza Strip, as they called it at the time, and still some today, was in the possession, it was illegally occupied by Egypt, just as Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, as they call it, was illegally occupied by Jordan. recognized only by two countries, Jordan and Pakistan. So to come to your the bulk of what we want to talk about today is what lessons have been learned from yesteryear, from history, and it seems that no lesson has been learned. Israel has twice vacated the Sinai with the promise from the international community that there would be some kind of measure of protection against an assault against the Jewish state. And we see that, of course, not to have been true.
Wow. What would the rabbi's policy be right now regarding Gaza? And not just in general, but regarding Egypt as well.
Meir, about 9 months ago, I appeared with you on this podcast. Now, I've appeared with you several times since, but nonetheless, 9 months ago, and the title of that podcast was Rabbi Kahana Right. Now, that was 9 months ago, which meant it was about 5 months before October 7th, the massacre, right, the atrocities, the pogroms, the mini Holocaust that took place inside of southern Israel. At the time when we discussed it, we talked about the various components in Israel and perhaps even out, those people who came to see that Rabbi Kahana was absolutely right in most, if not all, of what he said about Israel, its enemies, and its need to understand that Israel stands alone. If we would have taken a survey 9 months ago as to that question, was Rabbi Kahana right? There's no question that in Israel, those who are called the nationalists, the right wing, the right of center element, would have absolutely said, in light of everything that's happened since, since we lost the rabbi, they would have said, yes, he was absolutely right. We've seen two intifadas. We've seen terrorism escalate. People need to remember, of course, that Yasser Arafat, who was a Nobel laureate in 1994, there was more terrorism, more Jews were murdered by Palestinian terrorists after Arafat got the Nobel Peace Prize. So reality suggests that anyone with common sense and a pulse would have answered affirmatively. Yes, Rabbi Kahana was right. But that was before October 7th. I would venture to guess that if those same people were tabulated today, post October 7th, that number would be considerably larger. Those of us who are considered on the right, the nationalist, the term that's become a pejorative term, the settlers, the wonderful people, perhaps the best people in the world, those people, of course, understood completely. They didn't need October 7th to tell them that Rabbi Kahana was right. But those people who are, and I'll label them just for the moment as the moderates, even those who are slightly left of center, they today have said quite clearly, oh my God, Rabbi Meir Kahana, that firebrand, that radical, he was right. The only people, by the way, and it's not to be a matter of surprise, who actually don't believe that are those hardcore people on the left who still demonstrate in Israel, who still want this episode to be a reason to depose the Prime Minister Netanyahu, and who demonstrate against Israel because they think that anything that has anything to do with the word that they use, that dirty word occupation, is probably the cause of the conflict. But Rabbi Meir Kahane was right then, he was right after we had lost him, and he is more right, when I say he, is the underpinnings of the ideological movement that created Israel and ought not to be lost. Zionism, contrary to what many in the left believe, isn't something that needed to be ended with the creation of the state of Israel. Zionism was not something it wasn't a plan or a policy which was to establish a state of Israel and then see its function having been fully fulfilled. Zionism is something we're supposed to live every day. And remarkably, the people who are the strongest advocates, supporters, purveyors of the true Zionism, of the Jewish ideology, are those people who've been most vilified. And as we talk today, we'll see that they've been vilified in the United Nations, by the United States, by the European Union, and many so-called organizations, I should say many organizations which are so-called friends of Israel. If there's one lesson that we've learned about history from Rabbi Meir Kahane, is that we do indeed stand alone, that the fate of the Jewish people and the Jewish nation is in our hands. It isn't in the hands of the others. And the other thing that he used to teach quite often, it was something which was almost ubiquitous to his presentations, was the comment, no one will respect you if you don't have self-respect. And the way that Israel had managed its relationship with the, because the pressures from the outside world was not one which was going to generate or engender any self-respect. Israel today needs to stand firm. Israel needs to destroy the enemy. That word destroyed has morphed into defeat the enemy. No, Israel needs to destroy the enemy. And only then will there be self-respect. And with it, perhaps even reluctantly, there will be respect.
Well put. You know, we have a short video clip of Rabbi Meir Kahane. If Gary in the background could show one of those clips, and then we'll discuss it going forward. Very interesting. Was absolutely ahead of his time, and absolutely right. Do we have that clip?
If it's not,
We will momentarily. Keep talking.
okay.
Okay, very good.
Allow me to keep talking, if I may. There was a press conference. There was a press conference that was held today in the United States. Joe Biden, he with the mental acuity of a baked potato, gave a press conference at which point he talked about the fact that he was upset that Israel didn't show enough restraint in prosecuting this war in Gaza. And he actually made a comment, and he said that he didn't use the word lecture, but he's lectured Israel that unless Israel has, and I'm using his words, a credible plan to win this war in Gaza, a plan that the United States would find in favor of, a credible plan that Israel needs to hold back. And it's absolutely absurd. It's absolutely absurd that the person who was in charge of the American debacle in Afghanistan, they left, was that their credible plan? Israel doesn't need to be lectured to by a country that has not won a war in 80 years. This is insanity. Israel needs to do what's best for Israel. Damn the rest.
Absolutely.
3 years ago, I served in the army in Samaria on the West Bank. In Ramallah, the Arabs rioted. So they sent me there to put down the riots. Now I want you to know that not 5 minutes passed. The word spread through that town like lightning. Kahana's here. The rioting stopped. It's important that every one of you know what the name Kahana means to the Arabs. It means terror. They're afraid. And that's the only language they understand. And for those nice Jews sitting here who say, that's terrible, let me just repeat what Moshe Aarons once said to a group of UJA givers in Jerusalem. One Jew got up and he said, why must there always be war? Why can't we sit down with the Arabs, coffee and cake, and work the problem out? And he said, sir, this is the Middle East, not the Middle West. That's right, it's the Middle East. And that's what the Arabs know and understand. If you're good to them, you're not good, you're weak. And if you're weak, you're dead. And if you're strong, they listen to you. I don't expect them to love me. I'm not the kind of Jew who walks around begging people to love him. I'm sick and tired of being... You know when people love us? After every Holocaust. That's when they love us. That's when they love us. That's when they give us plaques and monuments, and Jimmy Carter gives us a Holocaust commission. Well, I'm tired of Kaddish, and I'm tired of yortzites, and I'm tired of plaques, and I don't want love, I want respect.
I heard also there was a little minor misunderstanding, the whole deal with this, with the Sinai. The misunderstanding was that actually the deal was that we offered them cyanide, not the Sinai, and the paperwork was wrong. So anyway, back to you guys.
Now, there was a giant of modern Jewish history, and it's remarkable because he was the one who actually gave meaning to this concept of never again. I have heard so many, in fact, just yesterday, a spokesman for the Israeli government said, today is never again. Today is never again. It was a phrase which was used, of course, by the Jewish Defense League, and it gave it meaning. And there's so many other Jewish organizations and Jewish politicians and Jewish pundits and commentators who've used the term never again. And yet here it is, we had October 7th, and it happened again. I had a conversation with my brother just last week, and he said, you know what? It's lip service, this comment of never again. Rather, it has become, here we go again. This is insanity. It's insanity. Never again means, never again will we capitulate, allow this Western world to pressure the victim at the advantage of the villain. It's insanity. I'm just going to remind some people that in the opening week of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there were a number of European nations which actually contacted Israel and asked Israel if Israel could provide to these European nations certain anti-missile technologies and anti-cyber war technologies for fear that the Russians would turn on them as well. When they thought that their ox was being gored, they wanted Israel's help. Today, when Israel is defending its very right to exist, these same European nations that came running to Israel, some openly and some quietly, are the ones condemning Israel. This is insanity. It needs to be called out. They need to be ignored. These are the nations which were quiet when we had the real Holocaust. And now they remain defiant in their accusations of Israel's responding to this mini Holocaust that took place in southern Israel. The only respect, as Rabbi Kahana said, is when you have self-respect. And self-respect means doing what we need to do. It's really that simple.
Absolutely. Prior to Israel giving up the Sinai to Egypt, through the Camp David Accords, Israel had they built cities in the Sinai. They built Yamit. They threw the Jews out. And then it was repeated when Israel gave up to Gaza, and they threw Jews out of there. And we see what the result is, that rather than building up a society, there's a war going on. There's a plan for a war going on, and they're stockpiling weapons, and they're waiting for the day that they could attack Israel, the Jewish state, and slaughter Jews. And that day happened on October 7th. And where did they get the weapons from? Well, it's been smuggled through the tunnels from Egypt to Gaza. And Israel isn't covering a lot, and Israel will be embarrassing Egypt a lot, and will also be embarrassing the United States for pressuring Israel to make such retreats. And because it shows that all of these peace deals, they're not grounded in any kind of sincerity, and let's have genuine peace together and prosperity and real coexistence. It's not at all. It's the absolute negation. Their slogan is, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That's what they say. That's what they say at every single protest. That's what Hamas says, and that's what the masses of Islamic organizations and followers throughout the world believe and say and proclaim. You know, actually, yesterday here in Toronto, there were these pro-Hamas gangs that actually gathered in front of a Jewish hospital, the Mount Sinai Hospital in Toronto. And some of them climbed up on the building and were intimidating people and impeding people going in and out of the hospital. Why? Because it was built by Jews. There's a Magen David, a Star of David there, and they're targeting Jews. And they say you never hear at any of these protests that they have any kind of olive branch for peace or anything. They always say, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, and Intifada revolution, internationalize the revolution, the Intifada, globalize the Intifada, and they're killing Jews, and they worship, and they sell all these groups all over the world. Celebrated October 7th when it was live streamed by Hamas supporters in Gaza, in Israel, when they slaughtered Jews. They were happy. They were ecstatic. That's the face of the enemy that Israel and the Jewish people face today. And Rabbi Kahana, 100% calling out reality. And why was he trying to call out reality? To save Jewish lives. There's been so many Jewish lives that have been lost because masses of Jews did not want to accept that reality, but it's a fact.
Can I make two comments, Mayor?
Sure.
The first one, I'm going to fall back to a very quick mention. You'd made mention of Yamit that was given up. I was in Yamit 1978 and 1979. It was prior to Israel giving it up as part of the peace treaty with Egypt. Yamit, right, for those of you who didn't have occasion to visit, was one of the most beautiful Jewish communities that one could possibly imagine. It was on the white, and I mean white sands of the area. It was just magnificent. And of course, Israel, in the expectation that peace might follow, gave up Yamit. The community was torn down. No one had ever lived there. There was no community ever there before. It was built from the ground up on this white sand on the beach. And when it was torn down, there were two conditions that Israel imposed that said that had to be observed by the Egyptians. And the Egyptians, of course, readily agreed. The one was that there was a monument that was erected to the soldiers, the Israeli soldiers who had fallen. It was a tall, 35 to 45 foot tall spiral staircase just going up in the middle of nowhere. And as you climbed the stairs, it had the names of all the Israeli soldiers who had died defending Israel on that occasion. The other one was that Israel imposed a condition that the synagogue, that one synagogue would be left standing, that Israel would not be responsible for tearing down synagogues. And the Egyptians readily agreed. 24 hours after Israel pulled out of Yamit, having taken everything down except those two pieces, Egyptian bulldozers took them both down, both the monument and the synagogue. What's ever more remarkable was I was watching John Chancellor on NBC News many, many decades ago, was interviewing an Arab in Cairo, and the Egyptian said that he was anxious for the peace to happen because he wanted to go back to his home in Yamit. There was never an Arab in the history of mankind who ever lived in that area that was occupied by Yamit. It's insanity. And we come to realize that we live in a world where the Arabs lie and they get away with it. It's accepted. And when we tell the truth, we're vilified. It's an incredible, it's a twilight zone. To come back to a more recent comment, in July of 2022, Biden visited Israel. When he visited Israel, he visited Bethlehem in order to sit and break bread with Mahmoud Abbas. On the area there, they stood side by side for the photo op, and Mahmoud Abbas turned to the President of the United States and he said to him, we Palestinians in Bethlehem, mind you, we Palestinians need you, the Americans, to help us reverse the occupation of 74 years. The occupation of 74 years means that the Arabs view Israel proper, not just those territories which others call the occupied territories post-67. He said the occupation of 74 years, which meant that they wanted the United States to help them, the Palestinians, reverse Israel's very existence, because at the time, 74 years, of course, took us back to 1948. The comment was made, and yet Israel did very little about it. There wasn't a complaint. Instead, the pressure came to bear against Israel to establish a Palestinian state, a two-state solution, a two-state illusion, a two-state delusion, with the very people who actually don't recognize Israel's right to exist. And that's the way it stands today. Just one footnote about Bethlehem. If, in fact, there was going to be a two-state solution, we're told quite clearly, and it seems not to upset anybody because nobody in the Western world talks about it, there's going to be an Israel. This is the supposition that, of course, will have Jews and Arabs. And there's going to be a Palestine, which will be free of Jews. It'll be Judenrein. There'll be no Jews there. And the world seems to accept it. So I want to mention Bethlehem. Joe Biden went to Bethlehem. In 1950, the Arab Christian is the operative word here, population of Bethlehem was 84%. After 1967, with Israel in control, everything was in order. When Israel gave up access to Bethlehem and the Palestinian Authority took control, that number today, that 84%, is now 11%. 11% of Bethlehem is Christian, and the rest is Muslims. This is ethnic cleansing. This is what the world should be passing resolutions against. But that isn't the way it works. For as long as the Jews have been, there's been an anti-Jewish world. We have to recognize it. We have to do what's best for us. And as I said before, and the kindest way I can say it is for Israel to give the rest of the world the middle finger. It is insane. It is insane. As far as my pessimism, it's not pessimism, it's realism. There's always a little pocket of faith, pocket of friendship that one can find here and there. Some of you might have seen on social media, there was a film, Mike Pompeo is visiting Israel, the former Secretary of State, the best that Israel has ever had. And it was a magnificent scene of he surrounded by 100 IDF soldiers, and they brought him into and they were dancing and they were celebrating. That is a true friend of Israel. Yes. And sadly, that is a minority of a minority.
You know, we started the show by discussing Jewish self-respect. And on the short video clip, the rabbi articulated that quite well. In last week's Parsha's Mishpatim, it starts off by the rabbis explain, and these are the Mishpatim, these are the laws. And the rabbis comment on that this is a continuation of the previous Parsha, where the Torah was given and the 10 Commandments were pronounced on Mount Sinai, and that the rest of the laws are also part of that. That one is not holier than the other. And the rabbis continue to explain that these laws, that there was a court system set up, the Sanhedrin, and it was set up on the Temple Mount. So on the one hand, you had the temple set up there on Har Bayit, and you also had the Sanhedrin set up on the Temple Mount. It's a large area, the Temple Mount. In the spirit of Rabbi Kahana, in the idea of Jewish self-respect, the Supreme Court of Israel should not sit where it is. It should be on the Temple Mount. And what we do have on the Temple Mount is Hamas rallies, poisonous Jew hatred going around, unimpeded, uninterrupted on our holiest site. If the rabbi was here, what would his policy be, Meir?
Yeah, there's a terrible mistake that's been made by every single Israeli government since its inception as a modern Jewish state. And that is, it came to believe that that moderation on the part of the Jews, or moderation on the part of Israel, would be met by moderation on the part of this implacable enemy that isn't going to rest until the Jews are removed and Israel is destroyed. In anticipation of this program, and having watched, I think it was the previous podcast that we did a week ago, one of my dear friends actually sent me, and I'm just going to, I often take occasion to read some quotation because often some other words say so eloquently what needs to be said. So she sent me two quotations. They're very short. They both came from the book, The Story of the Jewish Defense League by Rabbi Meir Kahane, written in 1975, mind you. And if you would, it'll take just a minute for me to read both, actually.
Go right ahead.
Here's one. Here's what he said. No concessions of any kind will satisfy Arabs, and therefore, no concessions of any kind dare be made. Not 1 inch. Failure to understand this will mean tragedy for Israel. The other is this. Jewish self-defense and violence, when necessary, are not concepts to be deplored, but rather moral and Jewish concepts that are obligatory when all else has failed to save Jews in danger and in deep distress. I don't imagine that anyone who has any common sense, who believes in the preservation of their own people, would argue with that in a theoretical sense. Not in a theoretical sense if it applied to them, to their nation, to their people. It only is considered a radical thought when it applies to Israel and its quest to survive as the only Jewish state in the world. And we've learned the lesson. As far as Israel's friends concerned, now those are the two quotations that a dear friend of mine sent my way, and I appreciate it. There's one that I've used. I lecture not as often as I do about Israel, but on the Holocaust. And we talk about false friends. And Israel has found out, certainly behind the scenes, the many false friends that Israel has today. I mentioned the Europeans, and I dare say, and it's certainly not America, but it certainly is the American administration, and the two need to be separated. The American administration is foe, not friend. Well, in 1943, there was a great friend, a Calvinist, a non-Jew, who understood the plight of the Jewish people. Mind you, this is 1943. And he wrote a book, The Forgotten Ally, talking about Pierre von Passan. And he wrote a piece which I think is relevant, and if you'll allow me to say it, it talks about Israel and the faith the Jews have placed in false friends, and we know what the outcome is. Allow me to do this. This is 1943 from the book, The Forgotten Ally. I met Jewish leaders in those countries, brave men and sound Democrats, who insisted that the Jews must nevertheless stand firm, not run away, but rather ally themselves with all the forward-looking elements in the nations among whom their lot had cast them, and fight it out. But the political allies that they acquired that way always deserted the Jew in the moment of danger or whenever opportunism dictated. When the final showdown came, after Hitler's accession to power, there was none to stand by the Jews, not one. All the liberalism, all the sonorous phrases about democracy and equality of races and goodwill went for naught. And the Polish and Romanian equivalents of the National Conference for Christians and Jews evaporated like snow in a summer day's sun. The lessons of yesteryear are so often forgotten by the Jewish people. Rabbi Kahana was disliked by so many because he reminded them of those lessons. It was someone anonymous. It was a great quotation that someone spoke many years ago when asked the question, why does the world hate the Jews? And the response came back brilliantly. It said, because thousands of years ago, the Jews helped civilize the world, and the world has not forgiven them since. Incredible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's incredible.
Yeah.
On that note, in the Sudan and in other Arab and Islamic countries, I don't see worldwide protests about what's going on. I read a report that in the Sudan, there's close to around 1 million or more than 1 million Muslims that are being starved to death. There's no rallies about that. I don't hear a thing about that. In fact, it appeared today in an article in the Globe and Mail on maybe page 15 or something like that. But where I'm going with that, the complete beyond the double standard applied to Israel and the Jewish people on issues so-called morality. What's going on in Rafah, we made it very clear. Well, we want to eliminate the military capabilities of Hamas. That's the official position of the Israeli government right now. And the world is going nuts, and you have all these Islamic organizations unified, saying, let's gang up on Israel. How dare they? They can't do this. Looking for popular support from Western leaders on that issue as well. Double standard, 100%. There's no question about it.
Yeah, I lecture every week. I do a radio show. I appear in podcasts. I gave a speech this week as well. And forgive me, I think I might be repeating something that I said on this podcast last week, but it needs to be said again, especially in light of what you just said, Meir. There was a comprehensive study that was done in 2007, and it looked at the casualties, war deaths in the world, war deaths since 1950, between 1950 and the year 2000, 50 years. The number of war-related deaths was 85. Mind you, this is post Second World War numbers. The number is 85 million. Of the 85 million, it might be instructive to remember, 11 million of them were Muslims. 11 million Muslims were killed between 1950 and the year 2000. How many Muslims died in those 50 years at the hands of Israelis in the various wars that the Arabs manufactured and launched against Israel? The answer is 35,000. 35,000. The balance of those Muslims who were murdered, died, war casualties, were killed by other Muslims. Remarkably, if one wants to play with numbers, 1 out of every 315 Muslims who died in a war-related event, 1 out of 315 died at the hands of Israelis. And yet one would think, with everything that we've seen, the media, the academia, the United Nations, everything we talk about, that it was Israel somehow destroying the Arab world. The truth isn't self-evident, and the Jews often pay the price for it. Tremendous. It takes a tremendous capability to understand we stand alone, and if you think that the others are going to come to your rescue, October 7th will happen again.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. I believe we have another clip that we could show, a short clip of the rabbi. We showed it in the last podcast, but it's just so revealing of the brilliance and how far ahead the rabbi was and what his vision was for the Jewish people, so necessary. Can we put that video up on the screen for everyone to see?
There is not one Arab in the world who a minute before he murdered a Jew was not considered as not a bad Arab. On the day that you can prove to me how you can pick out the ones who are going to kill Jews and not, then I'll have a little more moral feeling for you. But in the meantime, when my wife has to go on a bus and my children and my grandchildren into the marketplace, and I'm not sure when a bomb is going to go off, put there by an Arab who until that moment was a good Arab, in your mind, says there's no collective punishment. It's not your wife, it's not your children. So don't be so moral at my expense.
Absolutely.
His only crime was common sense. His
Yes.
only crime was speaking the truth unabashedly. That's it. That's it.
Absolutely.
And yet, as I said earlier, the number of people in Israel, and those are the ones who matter, who have an opinion about Rabbi Kahana, well, that number has shifted quite dramatically in favor of, yes, the rabbi knew what he was talking about. When the rabbi wrote in 1981 the book Time to Go Home, others condemned him. Excuse me, not Time to Go Home, that was an earlier book. When he wrote the book They Must Go, forgive the confusion, They Must Go. He was talking about the fact that there was a potential fifth column living in Israel, which we saw, by the way, in May of 2021. He was quite eloquent in his ability to speak Jewish ideology, Zionist ideology, and the others were so quick to attack him, because if you agreed with him, the logical next question which would be asked is, and what are we doing about it? And for too long, Jewish leaders in Israel and those so-called supporters outside of Israel thought that Israel shouldn't do too much other than continue to be moderate so we can gain favor with those enemies who seek our destruction. Time to wake up, my friends. Time to wake up.
During the Super Bowl, we were alerted that the IDF Special Forces rescued 2 Jewish hostages in Gaza. And where were they? They're in someone's apartment, giving work permits to these people. It's insane. Coming into Israel under the pretense that they want work, jobs. First off, why do we even have to give them any jobs? Secondly, and more importantly, they're coming in and they're spying on Israel. That was proven with what happened on October 7th. Again, what the rabbi said just on the little clip about the issue of collective punishment. The reality is, they all chant from the river to the sea. They want Israel destroyed. And the book the rabbi wrote, They Must Go. We don't want those who want to murder Jews to live in Israel or have anything to do with Israel. We want them out. And we want to be able to see our families and friends in the Jewish state in perfect safety. And as the prophets say, Jewish children playing in the streets of Jerusalem in peace. He was 100% correct. I just can't, there's nothing else you could say. He was 100% correct. And Israel has to be a Jewish state. And our values, the values of the Torah, supersede, and our ideas of morality supersede those of Western governments and how they want to dictate what democracy and freedom should be. We have it all. And we have a phenomenal history of how to deal with humanity. Meir, when you look at how Israel is pursuing this war, how different would the rabbi consider the direction should be and the so-called day after?
Yeah. I made reference to Mike Pompeo a few minutes before. If America simply had a different administration, the previous administration, Israel would have been allowed to do much more of what you described that rescued the 2 Israelis. Israel has been fighting to use that common maxim with one hand tied behind their back. In fact, the United States wants Israel to have both hands tied behind their back. If Israel prosecuted the war in a manner which it is capable of doing, and doing so in order to eliminate the enemy, this would have been over a long time ago. There needs to be an understanding on the part of everyone. We believe it, we just don't say it. Our children, and I'm talking about the children in Israel, are much more important than any and all terrorists combined. You don't fight a moral war by sending food, supplies, cement, medicine to your enemy. You destroy the enemy. And it's interesting because Israel was boasting about the fact that it has been providing humanitarian aid to the Palestinians in Gaza. The innocent Palestinians. There are no innocent Palestinians in Gaza. There are no civilians in Gaza. They are either uniformed or non-uniformed terrorists. And their own polls have shown it. In all the polls that have been taken, all the surveys, the percentage of Palestinians who were considered civilians, who actually not only applauded, celebrated, but actually encouraged Hamas to do what they did, is overwhelming. And the more significant figure, a poll done by Beirut University, said that 98% of the Palestinians who were surveyed post-October 7th said that they were prouder to be Palestinians with Hamas having executed all those Jews. It's remarkable. And yet we send them supplies, and yet we pretend. That is not the moral thing to do. To do the roof knocking that Israel always does, to not tap on the roof to let them know that this building is going to be blown up next, is a terrible mistake. That is an act which is immoral. Aiding and abetting the enemy, those who would kill and those who have killed your children, is not a moral act. There needs to be a complete refutation of this moral relativism concept. Well, it's your suffering and our suffering, and the Jews are the ones whose women were raped, whose children were burnt, and we are the ones who were accused of genocide.
I know I'm going to show a quick video because I know it's going to make the mayor's blood boil. But one of the problems is what Israel does that is thought to be humanitarian, the world lies and says we're not doing it anyway. No matter what Israel does, we're blamed for not doing it. So just to get you guys a little riled up, I'm going to play a minute of this guy. Hear your comments. Here we go. So this is how little Israel is doing, and that we get no credit for anyway, so why do it?
Humanitarian update yesterday, February 12th, 160 humanitarian aid trucks entered the Gaza Strip via Israel's Kerem Shalom crossing. 160 trucks. Additionally, 23 trucks were inspected at Nitzana and entered Gaza through the Rafah crossing. That means 7 times more humanitarian aid is entering Gaza through Israel than Egypt. Reports suggesting that Rafah is the main crossing for humanitarian aid, or even the only crossing, as I saw in the BBC, are simply in opposition to the dry facts. Any allegations that Israel is restricting the entry of aid to Gaza are similarly detached from reality, whether through ignorance or, dare I say, in some cases, malice. In total, since Hamas used the Gaza Strip as the base for the October 7 massacre, 235,000 tons of humanitarian aid have entered the territory aboard 12,775 trucks. All this data is available on Kogat's mini site. And we remind you, according to our intelligence estimates, Hamas is hijacking up to 60% of that aid, and video footage of Hamas gunmen on top of those trucks have been circulating widely. Those 235,000 tons include 155,560 tons of food, including the flour that allows Gaza's 15 industrial bakeries to produce 2 million loaves of bread rolls, and pita breads every single day. Those aid deliveries also include 21,460 tons of water, again, since the start of the war, over 24,000 tons of shelter equipment, and nearly 17,000 tons of medical supplies. That's quite apart from the field hospitals whose construction in the Gaza Strip we have facilitated. Just in recent days, the IDF helped deliver over 20 oxygen tanks and other medical equipment to the Al Amal hospital in Khan Yunis, despite its abuse by terrorists as a military hideout. By all possible accounts, Israel is exceeding its obligations to facilitate the delivery of aid to the Gaza Strip. International donors that want to see more aid enter Gaza should simply send more. We're ready to facilitate it. They should also work urgently to replace UNRWA so that UN agencies that are not in cahoots with Hamas and covering up for Hamas can do a better job delivering the aid that is already entering the Gaza Strip.
Take it away.
Mayor, we're insane. We're absolutely insane. He says he said for 3 seconds that's over 60% of this aid, and it includes cement and everything else, ends up in Hamas's hands. No, how come he can't? Why would he not dwell on that and say, because of that, we have to suspend this because we are actually aiding and abetting Hamas by allowing over 60% of all these supplies to go on? We're resupplying Hamas. That's what you're doing.
There is an ignorance that is so rich in everything that was said there. This notion of the world needs to recognize and give us better credit for aiding and abetting those people who murder our children. Could you imagine when we've spoken about what the Ally response was to Germany when hundreds of thousands of tons of bombs were dropped in German cities? They didn't drop supplies. What they did is they destroyed the enemy. It's remarkable. It's unfathomable to think that we would actually not only give what they call humanitarian aid to the enemy, that we boast about it. We want better credit for it. We want more credit for it. We have lost our mind. And it isn't the first time that we've done a disservice to the cause that we fight for when we think that we are better people because we've sent. The only thing that Israel should be sending them are cruise missiles.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No question about
it. We have met the enemy, and he is us. That's that famous great quote in history. Pogo, the opossum, the cartoon character. That was first said, by the way, that cartoon in 1953, and it didn't get much currency. It actually became popular. That same cartoon was run again in 1970 during the Vietnam War, when all of a sudden you had people, Americans turning in Americans and everything else. And he reissued, Walt Kelly was the cartoonist. We have met the enemy and he is us. And that is certainly the case. That is certainly the case in Israel.
By just watching that little clip of the foreign ministry spokesman, what he just said, absolutely, there's no question about it. There's no question about it.
And
we're running out of time, so final comments.
Yeah, final comment. He, by the way, he's a wonderful spokesman. He's a very articulate person.
Yeah.
We just want to make sure that you and I get editorial control about what he says. Anyhow,
sure.
I've said this before once on a podcast with you, and I'll say it again. It almost needs to be said every single time we close a podcast, and I'll make no apologies in saying that I'm going to say it again in the future. In 1924, which is 100 years ago, there was a prolific Jewish writer who finished writing a book, and on the last page, he called it A Last Word. He was trying to defend the fact that he referred to the Jews as a separate and holy people. And he ended his book with this admonition. It's a very short piece. I'd like to say it because it is so relevant today, 100 years after he wrote it. Here's what he wrote. I console myself with the thought that if this book offends by its assertiveness, God knows the infinite tactfulness of thousands of other Jews seems to have offended no less. Whatever we do, we're damned. And I'd rather be damned standing up than lying down. Last word.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Meir, thank you very much for joining us. We'll continue with the series because it's so important to get this out to people, to the public, to our Jewish community, our friends and supporters out there, that they have to hear the truth, because, you know, they could just fall in love with the foreign ministry spokesman and just keep patting themselves on the back and saying, look what we're doing for the so-called poor, innocent people of Gaza, who cheer and support, and we're ecstatic with October 7th. It's just ridiculous that Israel doesn't, the leadership that there is right now, or those who are the generals, don't have the spine to stand up and tell the world, take a walk. We have to take care of business. Anyways, thank you very much, and thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Please share this on your various social media platforms. Shalom, shalom. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.